Hello, man. Get everything right here. Hello, man. I usually try to stretch this out a little because it's posting now, and it irritates me that that I have to wait, but it really doesn't matter. In my last video, I went over a few things, but I gave out this is not going to be a general follow up to the theory of justice or anything that we were going. We were moving down that line and everything. This is I told you I'd talk about Mgtow as a movement and Mgtow. Mgtow in general, most people say Mgtow. I've went over this a few dozen times already, but nobody seems to get it. Mgtow, it can be a philosophy, it can be a movement. It's a lot of things. It's a lot of things to a lot of different people, and there's some funny parts. I went through the 70s and I can vaguely remember parts of the 60s and everything. And we used to have collectivism back in the 60s, and collectivism, anti-collectivists. There was those hippies that were going, man, I'm not part of a collectivist. You're a collectivist group, and I'm not a collectivist. And I heard a lot of that when I was a kid. I did pamphleteering when I was a kid, and I went through this discussion one day with a notable hippie, and I was just a child at that time. They would give pamphlets to children, and they give us like 10, 15 bucks to go spread these around all our neighborhoods and everything. And we did it just because it was like 10, 15 bucks at that time. It was good money, and there was no other way for me to make money in my neighborhood. So the pamphleteers would come around, and I was like, yeah, I'll go deliver one to each house. And it was a movement back there. It was a civil rights movement. There was a lot of different things happening back there. There was there was the black rights movement. There was the feminist movement. There was this general all around hippie movement and everything. But we had the same kind of thing had came in there. There was these anti-collectivists that were like, don't label me, man, I'm not part of this thing. But but in the general sense, they were part of it. The funny parts about movements are they don't need your permission to be movements. Individualism and movements have nothing to do with each other. Collectivism in regards to civil rights had nothing to do with each other. The civil rights movement was going to be there whether they accepted it or not. The manosphere is like that. Mgtow is part of the greater manosphere and it doesn't rely on a single voice saying, don't label me, man. It always became a joke at a certain point in the late 70s and 80s, the collectivists that were around, and we would laugh at them, and we would mimic them and say, I'm not a collectivist, man. And then we'd laugh at them because we knew that one thing about collectivism that became clear, the anti-collectivist, whether you're anti for a movement or against a movement, or you're for the movement, you're part of the holistic movement. Anti-feminists are part of the holistic movement of feminism. That's it. Go watch Marcus the Metaphysical's video on anti-feminism. Is just feminism, and it's part of the holistic movie. You can be an anti-Mgtow, and you're part of the total Mgtow movement. You can be an anti-collectivist and say, no, I'm not part of this. This is not, Mgtow's not a movement, and still be part of the movement. It doesn't rely on your acceptance. If you're around here and you're for it or you're against it, you're still part of the total, the holistic, the whole. So it doesn't rely on that. And it's quite funny how people move these things in and out of their brains, these notions of a collectivist culture and individualism. Individualism has nothing to do with, although in Mgtow, in being an individual is good and all that stuff. And individual is more a process of your memory, your visible perception, your attributional style. how you categorize thing in schemas, and it does it has nothing to do with Mgtow or men's rights or the manosphere in the total holistic scheme of things. You are part of a movement, whether you believe it or not. And if you're around here, whether you're arguing for it or against it, you're still a part of the movement. There were anti-collectivists, there were collectivists, during the 60s, I seen this argument play out. There was a great sign. It used to be on Oberlin College, and Oberlin College was the mecca of it was the kind of mecca of feminism in the late 1800s and early. So they had this sign that sat out, and it said, "Don't be a collectivist." And then it could, if you're doing this, don't do this. And if you're doing this and you don't doing this, and it had about 50, 60 topics, and it got smaller and smaller as it went down. And the last bottom line was hardly even visual at all. You'd have to get real close to it. And then it said, if you're doing everything on this sign, you're being a part of the collectivist. And that's the logic of it. If you're doing everything anti-collectivism and saying you're being a part of the collectivist, you're a collectivist. So collectivism becomes rhetorical in its sense. And I always thought that was funny when it was funny. And let me stop and say hello, Suthi. Hello, the King Karma. Hello, Portuguese Mgtow. Hello, a boy named Gil. Hello, Terrence. Hello, everybody that's coming in. So what I wanted to talk about a little and shortly, and I'll keep it brief, is the Mgtow movement doesn't rely on your individualism. Collectivism, it's been answered in the 80s, in the 70s, and the 60s. We used to laugh at those hippies that would be like, man, I'm not a collectivist, because it became so obvious that on both sides of the issues, if you don't have two sides arguing this thing out, it's not going to be a movement. If one side, the whole holistic thing takes a lot of people in a lot of different positions on this, and that's the movement in general. And the general movement is gender dynamics in itself, the manosphere. The male manosphere, it's MRA and it's PUA and it's Mgtow and it's Going Galt and it's the anti-collectivist and it's the whole general in the thing. And sometimes we get a bad name when bad things come in, like pieces of society. We're gonna get nationalism, white nationalists, black nationalists. We're going to get Israelite nationalists. We're going to get all sorts of that stuff. And we don't focus generally on that because it's just pieces and parts of the thing that reflects in society. There's micro level effects to these things that might change a position in the movement, but anti-collectivism general in a movie, every movement you're going to get anti-collectivists that like, don't label me, man. I just think it's funny. You don't put these labels on me because I'm an individual, and they're mistaking their individual sense to the greater purpose of the world and what's happening. I often think about that as do you think you're so important that if you weren't around here, this wouldn't exist? Does any one of us think that we're so important to the anti-collectivism via individualism framework that if you weren't here, this whole thing wouldn't exist without you? You're crazy. It would still be going without me, without you, without the anti-collectivist. Mgtow would still be going. And that's how you measure a movement. And we're not part of a Mgtow movement. We're part of a more manospherian movement of men asking for some basic human rights in this world, some basic human rights in the courts, and not to be labeled as slaves by the courts. And I think that's an admirable, honorable thing. And it's going to take years and 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 years to explain to these really conservative traditionalist judges that what they're really saying is, you think it's okay to have a slave. And man, we've argued this out in the 1860s and 1850s and had a great war about it. But people are stubborn in those positions. People generally they want the utility of the male to continue like it has been continuing, but that's a closed case too. Too much water is under the bridge now. Pandora is out of the box, I suppose some people would say. There's somebody opened up that box, and you're not closing it anymore. This gender dynamics thing that's playing out in the world is a greater thing than you could ever be. And I mean, if you are looking for a God and you're looking for something greater than yourself, any movement would act as that greater thing than yourself, if you believe in Buchananism or Bachmanism, or whatever that is. So is Mgtow a movement? Yes, it is a movement. It's a general movement of a larger thing, bigger than ourselves, that's asking questions about gender dynamics. It doesn't rely on any of the individuals that say, no, man, I'm not a collectivist. You can be not a collectivist all day, and you can be an anti-Mgtow all day long, but you're still part of the movement. Because that's the general shape and holistic form of the movement, and that's not arguable. And yeah, them things are really not arguable. And let me get my okay, there I go. Hello everybody. Hello, Taryn. Me and Taryn were having a look. You put a thing up, and thank you for putting that up, Taryn. If you didn't see it, you go back. It was generally kind of reflected what we were talking about earlier when there was two females, and I won't go into her and start it, but thanks for putting it up. I got to watch it. It was very interesting, and yeah, that's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about here. Even the people that Tara, and even the people that thought they were safe on one side are getting sucked into this thing and becoming part of the disadvantaged groups that I was talking about. But that's neither here nor there with this. Mgtow is a movement, and you can be anti-collectivism as you want, or be this individual. What you're wearing as a shirt, or the hat you choose to wear, or the bell-bottom jeans, if you want to go that, or a fringe leather jacket, it doesn't make you that important to the movement. Yeah, there were very few people in this world that could have affected. And I don't think if Martin Luther King was not around at that time, I don't even think that would have slowed it down any. Somebody else would have just filled those shoes. If Malcolm X wasn't around, if, Gloria Steinman and people like that and feminism wasn't around, if feminism would have still took root. There was underlying causes to these things. And unless those underlying causes go away, a movement will still be a movement. It doesn't rely on anything human. It relies on society, and it relies on justice, and it relies on how we perceive the world as a group. And it is very collectivist in its way, and it's very communal in its way. And whether you as a person think you're not it's not, or what are you? Even if you do want to say, okay, it's a philosophy, and you take a philosophy of Mgtow, you somehow become part of it. Just because of your presence, you become part of it. And you could take the philosophy of being the anti-collectivist, you're still a part of it, and it doesn't base itself on your approval. So when I hear these silly things, these silly things that men say sometimes, and they don't think through this, and I know there's a lot of very young men around here, and they'll stick to their guns on that. I will not have labels put on me. I went through that all when I was a kid too, and I went through the whole movement with Crumb and the cartoon books and the whole. What was that? Harvey Pekar writing the books for Crumb and the hippie movement. And I've seen all this before. And So I got a better view of what is going to happen here. And sometimes movements fizzle out just by social pressure and all that too. We're up against great social pressure with traditionalism. Traditionalism wants to take hold, and it wants you to be a Christian, especially in America. It wants you to be part of their group. And then you can be a collective, an anti-collectivist part of their group if you want. Go yell at them. We're not a movement. We're not the traditionalist movement. You can scream and yell all day, but you're a part of it just by being anti that. They took Black Pigeon Speaks. Yeah, I kind of figured that was going to happen sooner or later with Black Pigeon Speaks. He sometimes went a little overboard with his opinions, and he was going to be a target. But I'm always unhappy to hear anybody gets taken off of YouTube, because eventually I'll get taken off and you'll get taken off and everybody. And if we don't involve ourselves with the social cues that go on and step into the social cues, they'll take you down too. And you notice sometimes lately. Lately, I've been getting monetized. If you notice the titles of my videos, I use the social justice cues, and whether I take an anti-view against that or a pro-view against that, I've been getting monetized lately, and so that tells me that I'm not rubbing against the whole thing too hard, and that's kind of where I want to sit, where I'm not rubbing against them so hard where they feel a need to take me down. Yeah, I'm amazed they didn't unperson him later. That's the importance. I don't know how. For me, generally, if they took me all down, it wasn't. It's not like I wouldn't say what I was saying anyways and start my own personal blog somewhere. Um, but it's probably a good idea to back your stuff up anyways. Especially if you're using little clips. I think he used the little clips and pieces of other people's work, and that's what's going to get you in trouble in this business. If you lose little clips, if you're not, I mean, as much as he thinks he's an individual, when he's using little clips and pieces of other people's work, he's just, basically stealing. And that's where the most people will find, that's where they'll take you down, and they'll take your work off, even if you do. But you got to get 3 strikes anyways. Getting 3 strikes is really hard. I came this close to getting 3 strikes. I noticed your sign wasn't working. Was working. Yeah, I put batteries in it. I just forgot to turn it on. If you want me to turn it on, I can turn it on. I just don't like to. When I talk and I look at the screen, I was looking over there, and that thing's always choop 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 choop. And I'm going to replace this thing pretty soon, anyways. I think I'm going to go with a projector above my head down onto a white screen in the back, so I can project whatever I want to project on the screen. They're only $68 now. I can get a Roku projector that'll go 100 inches for $68. So why shouldn't I? And the screen's like $19, and I can basically put up whatever I want back there then, and that's whatever I choose to go up, and that'll be kind of cool that I have some kind of power over it, and it'll give me agency on my cast. But we're talking about the Mgtow as a movement, and I did a video a little while ago about this too, and Mgtow is a lot of things, whether you think it's a philosophy, whether you believe a movement in a general sense doesn't rely on your opinion. It doesn't rely on you believing in it. As a matter of fact, if you don't believe it, you vicariously become part of that movement through your anti of that movement. Movements are like that. They have people for them, people against them. You have arguments, and that's the whole holistic scene. So, I hear some people say, "Oh, this is a philosophy," and I like the philosophy of Mgtow, but I don't think it's just a philosophy. We're doing something, for some greater reason. You're not here for no greater reason. Otherwise, if you believe that you're not part of a movement, I have to ask the question: Are you here for nothing? Are you here for kecks and laughs? Is that it? Is that why? Are you here for, we know men get screwed over. We can see it, but that's not the general cause. No individual man's general outrage toward it is, it's part of it. It's a little piece. It's a little sand, that little piece of sand in a whole vast thing. But it's not about one single cause. It's not about the ire of men. It's a greater. It's the greater thing. And when we look outside of our narcissism, sometimes, and we'll see a greater theme out there, and that's a good thing to do, because you start living in a world that is bigger than yourself, and then you can marvel at the grandeur and the grandiose nature of the world. Then there was lots of, I think it was Pablo, whatever his name was last, with the Alchemist. He would talk about, the grander theme of things, and just marveling at, from sheep farming to the new philosophy of the Alchemist that he talked about. But that's neither here nor there. I'd have to go through the book to kind of get the small details of it. And The Alchemist was a great book if you wanted to read it. I think he talks about being an individual too in The Alchemist. Cheap cream tea thing, cool idea. Yeah, I was going to buy a green screen, Taryn, at one time, and then I thought, man, a green screen, I'd have to do so much work with the actual embedding of the program and everything. And I thought a better cheap green screen would be just a projector hooked to the back of this computer. I have the 580 card with the extra HMIDs, and I can do, that'll actually be what I was thinking, that'll actually be the second screen, or the second. I don't have to have a physical monitor in front of me. The projector can be the monitor, and I can project that. And when I do split screen, I can just actually do the split screen. That'll reflect on the back. I can see in the split screen right in front of me what's going on, so I can control it easily. And that'll make it easier to screen share sometimes. So that was my thoughts. I'll see. I'm going to work it out with distance and everything. I'd like to move into Dougie's room and take over Dougie's room as my office. It used to be my office back in the day, but there's beds in there now, and Dougie sleeps in there. But I really like to get my office back because these doors open up over here, and they're the sliding doors that slide open into the walls, and it just opens up my office to my room and then to the hallway that goes to the living room and the kitchen and everything else, and that just makes that thing a lot better. It'd give me that feeling of spaciousness that I so desire, I suppose. There are different levels of narcissism. Yeah, there's a lot of different levels of narcissism. I was talking the other day with a person, and she was yelling at, saying I was a narcissist, and I thought, well, this is one of those that co-assist that believe everybody is a narcissist. And narcissism is highly overused towards men, because men are generally confident, and a lot of people believe that confidence is narcissism, and it's not such a thing. So it's easy to call. But when I say they're just going back to the thing I talked about earlier with you're selfish, and that's what. Anytime you call someone selfish, you're the narcissist. Your narcissist looking down into the pool, looking back at himself. I had a hard time understanding that, and there was this little nun that taught me that years and years ago, and I guess I was arguing against something, and she had to explain to me that as a child, a 10, 12, 13-year-old child, whatever I was impetuous. You can imagine I was impetuous as a child, and she's, hey, narcissism is, looking into the mirror, looking back at yourself. And I kind of carried that. She was kind of right about that. Do you like to travel, and where would you go if you you have never been to. I don't like to travel. I'm one of the few people. I'm just I'm happy where I'm at. If I could go somewhere, I would go to the bayou probably and go alligator fishing, you know. That was about it. I don't have a real desire to leave America. I've been out of America before and it sucks. And I don't like people out of America. And wherever I go, I take myself. I'm one of these people that wherever I go, I take myself, and it generally doesn't make me feel any better or any worse being somewhere else. And anything I can do here. And, you know, the upper northern, northeastern United States, there's not a lot of things I can't do. I get four seasons. I get you know, if I wait long enough, my dreams will come true. I'll be able to lay on, if I want to lay on a beach, eventually I'll be able to lay on a beach in a water wonderland because I live off of Lake Erie. Uh, Short of that, visiting a different culture or anything, nah, I'm not into all that stuff. Uh, so I don't like traveling, and that's just me. You'd go just about anywhere, Taryn. Yeah. Yeah, those two girls were interesting. The one girl seemed to be that podcast that you share with me. She seemed to be one of them seemed it was just sometimes it seemed like they were talking about two different things at the same time. And I noticed that with females in my life. We used to laugh, me and my buddy Michael and me and Bobby used to sit at a lunch table together, and there's always these two women that sat like right at the lunch table next to us, and you can hear pretty much hear it's close quarters and everything. Uh, Michael would kind of nudge me and go, "Listen, listen, listen," and we just sit there and just listen to what they're talking about, and I go, "Oh." And he goes, "Yeah, isn't it funny? Both the women were talking about two separate things, and neither one of them knew what that they were talking about two separate things." And he goes, "Yeah, isn't that funny?" They were both just jabbering for the sake of jabbering, and they were talking about two separate things. And I was like, "Oh yeah, that is kind of funny." But they were happy within their own group there. However that thing plays out, that's their group, and we would just sit and watch that, having hours of entertainment. But that's what it seemed to me, that when girls get together, sometimes it seems to me that they're not talking about the same thing. Yeah, I've only been married once. I don't think ever getting married again will ever be an option. That's not. I'm not going to grow into being one of those 70-year-old simps whining at the bar about my girlfriend. I think that's immature and below a Mgtow. I think that's below a man's dignity. When I see that, there ain't no simp like an old simp, and boy, I don't want to be that. They're usually just waiting for their turn to speak. Yeah. Yeah, there's the past and being married. So I wanted to come on. It's always an interesting topic with collectivism and labeling and all that. The Mgtow movement. They'll say, "Oh," and when the press refers to us, most of the time they'll refer to us as the Mgtow movement or the greater movement of the manosphere, is what they'll say. And they'll say Mgtow is part of the greater movement of a manosphere. And I think that's where whether we like it or not, whether we give approval to it or not, uh, our disagreements with gender dynamics makes us a part of the movement, and that's something that's not up to us. Uh, that's up to the society in general, and it's not even up to society in general. It's up to this thing that happened. I think Kierkegaard would say it's just a thing that's happening, and you're part of it, whether you're arguing against it or you're arguing for it, or you're a subgroup of it, or you're a collectivist of of it or any part of the whole, the holistic, you are a part of it, and that's just the truth. And if you don't want to be a part of it, don't talk about these things anymore. And that's what I ask. If you don't want to be a part of the movement and you say those things, then what the hell are you doing around here? Are you just here for kecks and laughs? And if you're just here for kecks and laughs, I guess that's okay, but not at our expense. But your opinion becomes very devalued at that point if you're just here for kecks and laughs, or lols, as they say today on the internet language. If you're here for the lols, your opinion really doesn't matter. So coming at someone and saying, I'm not a collectivist, it's just really funny to me. And I know there's a lot of guys here that are, about my age and everything, and they're just grinning and laughing. I remember those collectivists, and I remember those anti-collectivists. There's always the anti-collectivists that bothered me, but I remember that sign that used to sit in front of Oberlin College. It was the art museum there. And I think I remember seeing it was very popular. The sign itself was very popular for about a year, and they got all taken down and everything. They used to sit in front of movie theaters when only one movie was playing, and that movie would play. You imagine that. There was a time in this country where you go to a movie theater and one movie was playing, and it would play for like 12 weeks. I worked in a movie theater as a child too. Under my child slavery laws, I was able to work in a movie theater and a car wash when I was young. And I believe that now in my life, when I look back, I was just a child slave. But that's neither here nor there. It's always good to pre-introduce the kids into slavery. That's what I said when President Trump was sitting there with a kid with the lawnmower in front of he likes the kids to mow the White House grass. And I guess it's a big honor or something with the Boy Scouts or whatever and everything. But when you got a 12-year-old kid sitting there mowing the grass for the honor of it, you're just introducing him to the rules of slavery as a man. And that's where it becomes offensive to me. And basically, there are child labor laws in this country that that was a flyby on him. And yes, at 12 years old, you can't sign off of your child labor laws. So I always love that picture of Trump standing next to the boy with the lawnmower, because I think he's so out of touch with actually regular society that he actually thinks that was a good thing. Do you have a favorite movie? And what is it? The original Blade Runner has always been my kind of favorite movie because it has that great ending of what he says at the end when he's clinging to life and he realizes what life is and how important it is. And if you get back, Rutger Hauer is like he's like the Terminator sort of thing in that ending. So that was my favorite movie, Blade Runner 1. There was the Blade Runner 2, but I didn't quite get the concept of it. I never got to actually finish watching it. You ever start watching a movie and you start watching it 3 or 4 or 5 times over and you only get the half because something happens and you got to go? And then like years and years and years later, you actually end up seeing the end of the movie. And it's like, wow, I didn't know it ended that way. But that's what Blade Runner 2 is for me. I started watching it like 3 or 4 times. And I never actually got to see the ending. Mine is Deer Hunter. Deer Hunter is a very good movie. I guess there's some deep philosophical thoughts about what the deer hunter was. And they used to talk about it on the internet a lot. What was the philosophical argument to the deer hunter and everything? And it goes wild places and everything, but that's a good movie. Who is that guy? That was blah, 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 blah. I can't remember his name right now. I can see his face, but I can't remember his name. I don't think I finished watching the Deer Hunter. Did you? Yeah. I can't really remember what the what the ending of a lot of movies are now. The great part about getting old is you get to rewatch every movie again for the first time. That's an autism joke, by the way. And but that's funny. I used to do that to my mother all the time when she got autism. I would say my sister would yell at me for it, and I says the great part about entertaining mom at this time is she gets to watch all the movies again for the first time. So I just put one on, and she go, "Oh, that was a really good movie. I never seen that before." And yeah, you will die someday too. Yes, we'll all die someday, and that's a thought that I got used to about blah blah blah. I was going through that, and my father had died, and my mother had died, and a friend's mother was dying, and I got to spend a lot of time in those places of death, and they have a lot of great books, so you get to read all the books while you're there. And if you're spending 8 hours with your friend and he's watching his parent die or something, and I can't remember I never could remember what you call those places. They always have to correct me about those where people go to die. And I don't want to do that when I get old. I want a Viking funeral. I want to go out with two heads of my enemy, and I want people to throw me on a raft and throw gasoline on it and float me out into Lake Erie and start me on fire and just watch. I'm gone. um, the great De Niro line was holding the bullet. This is not bullshit. Yeah, go to less funerals. Yeah, I don't go to any funerals anymore. I pretty much stopped going to funerals because they bum me out, and I don't see no reason in society why we really should have funerals. Once you get comfortable with the idea, I think there should be courses that people take, and if people are really, really, really uncomfortable with the idea that you live and then you die, or you came from nothing and you live and then you die, life is negation. Uh, I think that can inhibit the way you live your life. And Camus talks about this. Samas talks about this, about living and dying in negation. And I always say, when you think about dying, think about where you were before you were here. And then, was it that bad? Can you remember it being that bad? And then you go, no. So obviously it's not torture. And you have really nothing to worry about. Before you were a baby, think about that. Where were you? That's what it's going to be back to. So it's not that bad. And I don't really believe in a hell. So if I believe in a hell, I have to believe in a heaven. And those terms are not provable. I always say, hey guys, after I die, I'm going to come back and let you know. And then they go, oh, no, don't, Joe, you're not Jesus. And I was, no, sure, I'm going to come back and I'll let you know what's behind the veil there. Which is a ridiculous idea. Has anybody ever been dead here? My buddy says he's been dead, and he gives a description of it, which is a little bit disturbing to me. And I know a lot of people, there's great controversy about the people that have died while in operations, and they have lucid dreaming while that period has happened. And I suppose the mind was never dead, because if your mind dies, it dies permanently, and from lack of oxygen or whatever, your heart can stop working, your blood can stop going, but your mind is going to be going for a little bit of time after that. What did they say? It's 6 minutes without oxygen before your mind starts dying. So you have 6 minutes to dream all sorts of things before they put those electrodes on your chest and bring your heart back, or start pumping it with a machine. So at that point, the big question is, do you have a do not resuscitate order? Don't resuscitate orders are interesting. There's just requests not to be tortured, or let some hospital situation, keep you on a machine and just suck that money right out of the system on your behalf, because we're doing good. I have one of my crazier friends sleeping on my couch. He says he died 3 times. Did he die 3 times? I'd like to hear those stories. My friend says he died too, and he has a story about that. And and I would like to. It would be kind of cool to go over that whole thing and see, kind of work it out in a dreamscape, and see what's actually going on in that mind of his. But that's cool. Jung goes over Jungian symbols. You can get a book on Jungian symbols in the dream world. If It's one of his minor books that if you want to read someday. I've never really got into it because I'm not really into the metaphysical of all that stuff, whether you live or you die. What happens after that? I'd rather more focus on my happiness here while I am here. That's what Camus would say. It's all just absurdity to think that you know what's going to happen, or you know where you came from. When none of us know those things, and anybody that says they know those things, any preacher, any atheist, any civil person of civil religion, or if they telling you they know those things, they're a freaking liar. And that's the basis of a lot of philosophies. There's some things I don't know in this life. Uh, I don't know the distance between here and the closest star, and there's really no way to tell. So we kind of home in on that. We look at it and we kind of decide that this is the distance, because that's the best guess I have. And when you're saying you know what's going to happen in the afterlife and everything, you're just giving the best guess you can have. And then what we generally do in a pragmatic situation is we take everybody's opinion, put it inside of a jar, and see what the most common opinion is, and that's usually the truth. I often wondered about, you ever go to the carnival and there's the jar there, and there's I don't know how they do it. I can't remember how they do it. And they said, how many beans are in this jar? And there's like, 20,000 beans or something in that jar. And they take everybody's opinion and they take the meme of that. It takes a little while. With a computer now, you can do the meme of something in no time. But back then in the 70s where they did that, and they always find out that the meme of the people, the average of all the people was as closest to you're going to get to the answer that you're going to get. And that's pragmatism. I don't know what happens when I die. I don't know a lot of things. I don't know how far, that wormholes are out there. I don't know how far the closest star is, and any measurement is off by a little degree, even a micrometer. So we just live within the accepted boundaries of where we're at. And that's an interesting concept. Any machinist, any toolist and everything will tell you it's 0.002 tolerance. That's as close as I can get. Or it's 0.02. Well, that's the tolerances which I'm allowed to work with in life. And that pretty much tells us we're wrong about any measurement we do. And I love the women that think they can figure out flow dynamics. That's crazy. Because now we're starting to talk about, we're starting talking about so much bigger things, and basically string theory and all that stuff is just someone's ideology about what's going on, and they don't really know either. What about obligations of the dead? Questions that go unanswered. Oh man, that's a that's a complex thing. Obligations of the dead. Questions that go unanswered. I think justice takes care of that the best way it can. Justice, the thing we talked about earlier in the early podcast. What is justice? What is best for the what is best for the most, I suppose, obligations of the dead, and if they get justice or they don't get justice depends on the living. Uh, my father used to say, "Let the dead be dead," and that's the best thing we can do. I live in Canada most times of the year. No one leaves their houses. Yeah, yeah, I can walk outside even, and it's crappy, and there's not a soul out. It's great. Easter revenge, yeah. In the winter around here, it's like that. There's no one really around, and it's just nobody wants to go around driving around on icy streets. But we get very few of those days anymore. Hey, Wookie Lives Matter. Hello, everybody that's in. We're talking about Mgtow as a movement today. If you came in late, and I have to repeat these things a couple times during the podcast. And I know it gets repetitive because we get people in and out and everything. And we were talking about collectivism and a movement and basically anti-collectivism. Every movement isn't an idea of collectivism. Uh, when people do anti-collectivism, it's a different thing. It's all about their individuality, and your individuality has nothing to do with a movement. Movements are going to happen. Um, whether you like it or not, or whether you're a part of that movement, the movement doesn't rely on your acceptance to the movement, whatever you call it, and basically doesn't rely on the acceptance of you being an anti-collectivist. It's going to happen. The civil rights movements, we went through this in the 70s. I thought the anti-collectivists were their argument when it was happening, and their argument to the movement and everything was interesting while they were arguing these things out in a philosophical way. But after it was all over, people just laughed at them because they realized that they were part of the movement too. Uh, the anti-movement people were part of the movement too. The anti-collectivists were part of the movement. The hippies were part of the movement. The feminists were part of the movement. The black nationalists were part of the movement. The white traditionalists were part of the movement. They're all part of the general movement in a holistic manner. And everybody that said, no, I'm not part of that hippie movement. Well, even if you were a white senator from Georgia at that time, you were part of the movement, whether you liked it or not. You were a part of that movement. And we can look at those things in history, and history will tell us. And I wonder what history will tell us about Mgtow. I think they want to do one of those things where they just try to hide it as long as they can. Don't label me, man. Don't label me. I'm not a collectivist. That's funny. Most of the time I just say, hold on, strap in, and it's going to be a bumpy ride, man. It's like you're part of it, and whether you like it or not, hold on, strap in. It's going to be a bumpy ride. And that's all I believe about movements and collectivism and this general thing. But we are a bigger part of the whole. The whole is the manosphere. And that's mostly what I talk about is, man, what if the total manosphere just kind of got together and had a summit and decided to do something? That would be a beautiful thing. We decided to do one thing, like one Project Mayhem thing or something. I don't know what it would actually be. Or we try, if the PUAs and the MRAs and the Mgtows and the men's rights guys and the anti-collectivist Mgtow guys and the trans, whatever, LBGT and the whole movement in general just got together one day and said, we're going to do something with this one thing. What would that one thing be? I have no idea what that one thing would be. I suppose it would be rather like something we all believe in, is destroying the family courts and getting Uncle Sam out of our bedrooms would be a good start. But what if the whole manosphere agreed on one thing, I think that thing would get settled real quick in this society. But we can't really seem to get together on one thing, and that's the group dynamics problem I was talking about. Bling 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 back three or four. I don't know if it was two or three or four. Maybe it was two. Maybe it was last night. I don't know what I talked about yesterday, but maybe it was yesterday. I think it was yesterday when we talked about group dynamics and what I was seeing with that. But but it would be nice we just get together on one idea. Let's all just agree on one thing that we're gonna do, and then push our weight. And let's see how big the weight of the manosphere is. And I do think the weight of the manosphere carries a lot of weight. I think people would be surprised about that. All of those dirty hippies were college professors and teaching our children some commie bullshit. Yeah, I don't think we weren't allowed to talk about communism or socialism back in when I was growing up, and uh, the stuff that they talked on doesn't even hinge basically on. I think they rather talked about like Foucault would or Rawls would, and those the sort of things which was acceptable because there were books that were banned. I mean, you couldn't find a Kopropkov book anywhere to be found. If you talked about Durkheim, they would put you in jail, or Marx or anything. And all these guys, they have their special places within the philosophy of life. All of them make sense at a certain point. But yeah, I really liked it. Basically, after the '90s, when these Russian philosopher books like Dostoevsky started showing up, and I got to actually read them, that was great. In the school library, and we wouldn't throw them out, and it was her choice what books she would burn. It always sucks when someone decides what books you're going to read. In the library we weren't even allowed to have Mad magazines when I was going to school. You would get in trouble and get suspended for having a Mad magazine because that was so horrible. Imagine if you had a Crumb magazine and there were naked girls in it, you would get like taken to jail in my neighborhood. But I hear Dougie moving around in there, and I think I'm going to have to carry him outside again. And that seems to be my life right now, tending for Dougie until he gets over his sickness. And he wants to, about every hour, he wants to get off of his bed and go outside and do his business and stuff now. And I got to be really attentive to that. And I think it's about time for a pill for him too. So I'm going to let this thing go, and you guys think about what a movement is and think about what your part you play in this, because we all play our little part. And that's what I say as long as we play our little part, that's what you do. And if that's the best you can do, that's the best you can do. And it's the best I can do. We all play our little parts within this grander scheme of this movement, of this thing called the manosphere. And right now, that's good enough. That's good enough. I don't know when Martin Luther King or the next Barbarossa or the next Neo is coming around. I'll just sit around and wait and talk and try to keep it going until the next great orator comes around where he can articulate what men really want in a cognitive fashion. But until then, I don't know what's going to happen. It's like I say, strap in, man. It's going to be a bumpy ride. And most of all, thanks for coming around and listening to my blah, blah, blah. And most of all, thanks for being Mgtows. Mgtow.